I'm Elizabeth at A Literary Princess, and today I'm doing my George Eliot project video on Adam Bede. So this ended up being the book for February and March. It was supposed to be just for February, but that did not happen. So, Adam Bede is George Eliot's first real novel. Before this, she had only written short stories, and it takes place, like most of her stories, in a small village in the south of England. I read somewhere that this was actually supposed to be another story for Scenes of Clerical Life, but she ended up expanding it into a novel. I'm not sure if that's true, though I can't remember where I read that. Anyway, this follows several characters, mainly our title character, Adam Bede, who is a carpenter. He's not particularly well off or anything, but he is trying to better himself. He has been learning. He goes to this school. He really wants to just move up a little bit in the world. Not a lot, not above his station, but he wants to be able to get married and have a nice house for his wife. We also follow his brother Seth Bede, and these two are in love with two very different women who are the nieces of one of the tenant farmers. And the two nieces are Dinah Morris, who Seth is in love with, and she's a Methodist preacher who is visiting from the manufacturing town of Snowfield. And the other niece is Hetty Sorrel, who Adam is in love with. And she is kind of where our main plot takes place. There will be spoilers in this video because I don't know how to talk about this book without spoilers. Because there is a thing that happens and it is the main thing. But it doesn't happen until like here. So I don't know how to talk about this book without spoiling it. So if you don't want spoilers for Adam Bede, you should click away from this video. Hetty is a kind of vain, very naive young girl. She likes that Adam likes her, but she doesn't really like him that way because she wants the finer things in life. She ends up falling in love with Arthur Donnithorne, who is the young squire that is heir to all this land. He thinks she's very pretty. He starts flirting with her, giving her gifts. She's hoping that he'll marry her. That's obviously not possible because of their stations in life that are very different. She is an orphaned dairymaid. He is the heir to all of this. It's not going to happen. Unfortunately, Hetty becomes pregnant with Arthur's child, but she does not know this initially. Adam finds out about their affair and convinces Arthur to break things off with her for her own good. Hetty eventually agrees to marry Adam, but then she becomes pregnant, she becomes desperate. She ends up killing her child. It's very sad. Very sad. It's like, Eliot, you're just not going in with like a fun, happy story, are you? You're just going full. The story is kind of us learning about these characters and getting to know them and watching all this happen. It is a very character-driven story. There is not a lot happening plot-wise. And a lot of the most interesting stuff happens off the page because it's the Victorian era and we can't portray sex or child murder on the page. Fair. So really, this is about the characters. And I will say, Eliot does a great job with these characters. I really like Adam as a character. I also really like Seth, and I feel so sorry for him because their mother, Elizabeth, is just worships the ground Adam walks on and is in like, oh yeah, Seth. Like, you're so mean. Poor Seth. But I really liked both of them. I really liked Hetty also. I thought she was a very well-drawn character. I felt bad for her. I kept being like, no, you stupid girl, don't do that. And then she went and did that anyway. I will say I don't think Dinah Morris was as well drawn as the other characters, and that's because she's not here for most of the book. We see her at the beginning and then she comes back at the end. But we have this whole middle section where Dinah is not there and we're getting to know Adam and we're getting to know Hetty. And then we miss out on Dinah. And I think that ultimately hurts this novel because the romance ends up being between Adam and Dinah, which made me feel bad for Seth, but Seth was okay with it in the end. I do think that because we don't get to know Dinah the same way we get to know Hetty or Adam or even Lisbeth, we spend a lot of time with Lisbeth. But because we don't get as much of Dinah, we kind of miss out on her as a character, and it didn't feel very fulfilling to me to have her and Adam end up together at the end. Especially because it was like their romance just kind of comes out of nowhere. So that and the slowness of the book were probably my two big problems with it. And are why I ultimately didn't give it 4 stars. I gave it 3.5 stars. Because once this got going, it was very good. But it doesn't get going until like halfway through. What are some of the major themes in here? Big thing with this book is realism. George Eliot has in chapter 17, in which the story pauses a little, basically her manifesto on realism in literature and how she is showing life as it is and not how we want it to be. And that's why these characters aren't perfect. And the clergyman, Mr. Irwin, doesn't give like wonderful, super spiritual, amazing, life-changing advice, because that doesn't happen in real life. He's a guy. He's just a guy with human flaws, and he's not able to do that, even though we all want him to say something just awe-inspiring. That doesn't happen. And I think she does that very well with all of her characters, showing them as people. This is particularly done well with Arthur Donnithorne, who is the squire that Hetty has her affair with. He's not a good person, but he's also not really a bad person. He is a person who has been raised a certain way and who comes from a certain class of life where he does things unthinkingly without realizing how serious the consequence is going to be. He does feel bad about the whole deal. He's not just some awful cad that's like viciously going around with girls because he just wants to do whatever. He's a guy who got caught up in the moment and ultimately did something he shouldn't have done. Hetty's like a child, basically. I think she's only 16 in this or something. Like, she's young and naive. And yes, she's vain, and Eliot makes a point of like, yeah, she's a very vain girl. But that doesn't make her a bad person. Yes, she kills her child, but she's just absolutely desperate and doesn't know what else to do. So these characters do feel very real, very three-dimensional, so many layers to all of them. And Adam has flaws as well. Adam is kind of quick to judge people, but also very quick to just forgive everything Hetty does. So it's really interesting to see her build these very realistic characters. And I think she does a marvelous job with that. Would I ultimately recommend Adam Bede? Yes, I would. Not as your first Eliot, though. I would not recommend this as your first Eliot, just because it is so hard to get into. And also, another big problem with it is the characters almost entirely speak in dialect, with the exception of like 1 or 2. So it can be very hard to get into the mode of trying to understand what they're saying, because some of the characters have very thick dialect. Elizabeth is an example of this. Whereas some of the characters have less thick dialect, and then some of the characters code switch. Adam is one who code switches. When he's talking to Arthur Donnithorne, his dialect is much less. When he's talking to his mother, it gets heavier. which is also another thing with the realism that Eliot does fantastically. Although her publisher did tell her, he was like, no, you need to make some of this easier to read because people aren't going to know what it's saying. So I kind of hate to think what it would have been beforehand. But I would highly recommend this, but not as your first Eliot book, because it is slow, it's hard to get into, the dialect makes it difficult. However, I am happy that I read it, and I did like it once it got going. It was just a slow start. That is Adam Bede, the second read of the George Eliot Project. In April, we are going to have both The Lifted Veil and The Mill and the Floss. I am so excited to chat with you about them. Let me know down in the comments below, have you read Adam Bede? What did you think of it? It's been great chatting with you. I will see you soon. Bye.